If you want to skip the intro and go right to the close-ups with what we're testing today, I left chapters down below that'll take you exactly where you want to go. Today we're going to be looking at 4 different types of sharpening stones. Everything from $5 to $170. Explain why cheaper isn't always better and expensive isn't always necessary. Stay tuned and don't buy a sharpening stone until you watch this video.
Disclaimer, everything in this video was purchased with my own money. This video is not sponsored by any company and nothing was sent to me for free for a review.
You can find these all over Amazon under different brand names. They're all exactly the same. It doesn't matter how much you pay for them. I happen to pay $39 for this one, but rest assured, it is a cheap $3 to $5 sharpening stone that you can get elsewhere without the fancy brand name on the side. This isn't my sharpening stone. I'm just covering up the brand name. If you want to hear more info about this cheap sharpening stone and what the Amazon sellers are doing, I will leave a link to a video up here that'll explain all about this. I'm not looking forward to this. These cheap stones are a loosely bound aluminum oxide abrasive. They are very soft, delicate, and are high maintenance, which makes them very challenging to use, especially for the beginner. And the knife we're going to be using today is the Spyderco Delica 4 in VG10 stainless steel. One big downside of the cheap aluminum oxide stones is that they require soaking for at least 10 minutes before use. So we're like 6 minutes in and it's still absorbing water. These stones really do need a 10 to 15 minute soak before you use them. Otherwise there won't be enough water absorbed by the stone and it'll be a very dry feeling surface, if that makes sense. These one thing about these cheap aluminum oxide stones, or these soft water stones, is that they're a whole lot more sensitive to pressure and angle. Any amount of over angle will dig into the stone. Another thing to keep in mind is if it's cold where you live and you sharpen in a sparsely heated garage, basement, or porch, your hands are going to be completely cold and wet for a very long time. The sharpening experience with these stones is not good. They are very sensitive to angle, pressure, feedback, or what they feel like to use, and your patience dealing with the water's slurry mess. They are definitely some of the worst sharpening stones to learn on. I don't want to sound like a snob. It's just, this thing is just miserable to sharpen with. I don't know how anybody would enjoy this. I just spilled it everywhere. And here's a quick look at what the aluminum oxide abrasive scratch pattern looks like. It's an omnidirectional pattern, meaning the scratches have no particular direction, and this is caused by the slurry buildup on the stone. The aluminum oxide actually does a pretty good job at minimizing the burr, since the slurry is consistently coming into contact with the apex. However, I have found this can actually take away some of the ultimate sharpness. Again, since the slurry is constantly coming into contact with the apex, giving it slightly less bite, as we call in the sharpening world. Now for advanced users, there are techniques you can use to help mitigate this problem, but we'll save that for another video. Next sharpening stone we're going to be testing is the Shapton Kuromaku 1000. I absolutely love this stone. It's one of my favorite stones. It's an insane deal. Right now I think it's around $40 on Amazon, and you can't get a better stone for the money in my opinion. The Shapton Kuromaku line requires water, but it is not a water stone. It's what's classified as a splash and go stone. A simple splash of water and you're good to go. Very fast setup time and cleanup time. The 1000 grit also doesn't develop a slurry, so everything stays nice and clean. No more worrying about getting grit in your action, which is never a good thing. The Kuromaku is a ceramic bonded stone. You won't have trouble cutting the harder steels, unlike the aluminum oxide counterpart. It also gives great feedback, meaning it's much easier to tell if you're on your angle. It's a harder stone, which makes it more forgiving, and an accidental over-angle won't create a crater the size of Texas in your stone. This is a very beginner-friendly stone that's easy to use and learn on. With the Shapton Kuromaku, we have a much more defined directional scratch pattern. This is a fairly refined pattern and has some shine to it in real life. There's really not much to say here other than it looks very good. Nice, even, consistent scratch pattern. The Naniwa resin bonded diamond stone. This is a resin bonded diamond stone. It is not a plated diamond stone, meaning that the diamonds are, for lack of a better word, encased in a resin bond on the surface of a sheet of aluminum. This is a very interesting sharpening stone. It has very particular use characteristics, which we'll go over shortly. It's very expensive. Right now it's around, you can find it anywhere from $140 to $170. Normally these are around $170, maybe even $180. But right now, I actually found this exact stone in the exact link that I purchased it below on Amazon for around $140. If you're interested in picking up this stone, that's definitely where I'd buy it from. The Naniwa diamond stone is also a splash and go stone, no soaking required. It also has an interesting feel to it. It feels smooth, for lack of better terminology. The feedback is okay, not great, but not poor. But it's fairly forgiving, meaning an over angle isn't going to chunk the stone like a soft aluminum oxide would. It's not a fast cutter, and it does load somewhat. But what this stone does give you is the ability to put super crisp edges on any steel. It laughs at CPM M4 at 66 HRC. For me, where the stone shines is the crispin edges it produces. There's just something different. There's just a different feel to the apex on high carbide, high hardness steels that aluminum oxide and ceramic stones can't mimic. So despite leaving an extremely crisp apex, this stone does have a slight loading problem. Hopefully this is coming up. You can see where we have some steel that is embedded into the stone and it just doesn't come off, even with water. So what they do is they include one of these are called Nagura stones, and you're supposed to soak these in water. So we'll soak this in water, and then we're going to bring this stone back to a nice, clean, even surface. Now this process really doesn't need to be done every single time. This will sharpen several knives before you have to go back and resurface this stone. And because I thought it was cool, here's a picture of the surfacing stone. Even though all of the stones are 1000 grit, the Naniwa diamond stones produce a slightly finer scratch pattern than the Shaptons in particular. The pattern is nice and even, and in real life has a very pleasing finished edge look. One thing I noticed about this stone is it deburrs very well. You can get very close to hair-whittling sharp right off of this stone. I'd like to eventually pick up the 3000 and 6000 in this line. If they're anything like the 1000, I'm sure the bite you get off of more refinement from the 3 and 6000 would be crazy, especially on high carbide, high hardness steels. So everybody wants some perspective. There's a single strand of hair. There it is. The cool thing is that it's about to get even closer, like way closer. We got some stuff coming. I just can't recommend the cheap aluminum oxide stone. If you like using them, then that's fine, but if you've never used one, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. If you only have $5 to $10 and can't swing $40 for the Shaptons, I'd recommend saving for another week and picking up a cheap $20 diamond plated stone, which we'll talk about in a second. The $20 diamond plated stone will serve you much better than the cheap aluminum oxide. The Shapton Kuromaku line of stones is the best bang for your buck in my opinion. I've said this 1,000 times on my channel, it seems that I'll say it again. You just can't go wrong picking one of these things up. The Shapton 1000 combined with the same $20 diamond stone will get you through almost any sharpening stone scenario. The Naniwa resin bonded diamond stone I would reserve for people who already know how to sharpen well and for high carbide, high hardness steels where you see the greatest benefits. You won't see any benefits sharpening your 1095 on this stone. If you have knives in CPM M4, M390, S110V, CPM 4V, etc., and you already know how to sharpen and get the most out of your stones, this is a handy stone that will really bring out the apex sharpness. Since we mentioned it, we might as well briefly talk about it. That's the $20 satc stone that you can get off of Amazon. If you're interested in a full-length video review on this stone, which I'd highly recommend watching before you purchase this stone, I'll link that up here. See if I got it right this time. This is the perfect stone to complement a 1000 grit sharpening stone, and personally I would buy this stone before I bought all of those other stones. This is what I would call a profiling stone. This is the stone that you want to do most of your sharpening work on. This is the stone you want to establish your initial bevel on, apex, and create that burr. Once you've done that, then you can move on to the finer grit stones like the 1000, 6000, or 30,000. But if you take pretty good care of your knives, this stone is not a necessity. You can get away with sharpening on a 1000 grit stone perfectly fine. However, if your knives are in really bad shape, they've got some big chips or nicks in the blade, and you want to take care of that and get them perfectly apexed again, this is the stone that you're going to want to do your work on. For $20, the stone doesn't come with a stone holder or even a protective case. You're going to need a block of wood to raise it up off the table in order to sharpen. I'm going to repeat a lot of what I said in my review. The 400 grit side is great for profiling. It removes steel fast and doesn't require water. Simply pull it out of the drawer and go. The metal being removed will simply sit on the surface until you wipe it away with the towel. The downside of the $20 diamond stone is the 1000 grit side is very contaminated with coarser grits, so don't expect a perfectly even 1000 grit finish on the fine side. That being said, combine this stone with a cheap chromium oxide strop and you can still get some great edges with very minimal cost, mess, and time invested into sharpening. That is really sharp. The scratch pattern is extremely coarse, but who cares? That's exactly what we want out of a stone like this. The fine 1000 grit side is almost indistinguishable from the coarse side, but you can see all of those deep scratches in the scratch pattern from the contamination. And here's a shot of some of those metal particles that have been removed from the knife that built up on the surface. If I was starting from scratch today, I'd buy these two stones. Depending on what shape your knives are in would depend on which one I'd buy first. Buy the diamond first if your knives are in really bad shape, and buy the Shapton 1000 if your knives are in somewhat decent shape. Either one can profile or make your knives really sharp. There's just compromises you have to make with either or. Combined, they are